Sand cake, huh? I know that cake very well. One of my favorites. Luke chapter 6, verse number 31. We have the golden rule we talked about before we finished our class last time. The golden rule, the golden rule, treat others the same way you want them to treat you. Sometimes that's a challenge for us, so isn't it? Isn't it a challenge sometimes that sometimes we don't want to treat others the way we want? It's a challenge. But as a Christian, we're not to be like the world. We're to be set apart from the world. That's why we were sanctified or set apart for God's use in this world. And just my opinion, they had laws and we have laws to protect the innocent, and what we studied before that was we don't retaliate. That's not the Christian way to retaliate. So we observe the golden rule. It's a test of love, test toward our attitude toward others, even the evil. We treat them the way we want to be treated, that we might win them over. It's loving our neighbor as ourselves. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12, Jesus says. So now in verse 32 through 36, we have a different subject. In verse 32 through 36, he's going to switch talking about our responsibility to love, and you will see some different things here. In verse 32, he says, "If you love those who love you, what credit is there that to you? For even sinners love those who love them." He got a point, doesn't he? A very impactful point. Jesus says, if you love those who love you, there's not really any credit for that. That's a good thing, but Jesus is laying down something higher, isn't he? He's laying down something for us more nobler as a Christian, and that's our conduct. We're to do good to others without any kind of thought of gain, no gain from it, and we are to do this simply because God loves us, and He paid the ultimate price, and so we are to love because God expects us to. Verse 33, if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is there to you? For even sinners do the same. And again, we can see this. It's the same thought in verse number 32. We do good to all. There's no credit for doing good to someone who always doing good for us, because even a sinner does the same, and even someone not a Christian, and we're set apart from the world. So in verse 34, he said, if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even a sinner lends to sinners in order to receive back the same amount. That is a challenge for us, isn't it? Again, it's the same principle as loving others, same principle as doing good to others. So he's saying if we lend to others, we don't do that with the anticipation of expecting them to pay you back. We want them to pay you back. We hope that's what they do. But he said, if you pay them back if you pay them with the attitude that they're going to pay me back, he said that's what sinners do. So he's summing up his teaching, which is to love your enemies. That's what he's talking to us about. Verse 35, but love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. For you will be the sons of the Most High, for He Himself is kind to the ungrateful and evil men. So if you love your enemies and you do good, we have a great reward. Who's the great reward from? If we do good to our enemies, God. We got a reward coming. Even God is kind to the ungrateful. Even God is kind to the evil men. Jesus Christ wants all to be saved. And so in verse 36 he says, be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Mercy is one of the attributes of God, and we are to have those attributes. We're to be like our Heavenly Father in heaven. Verse 37 and 38. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Pardon, and you will be pardoned. Give, and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. For by your standard of measure it will be measured to you. He is what kind of a judgment is he talking about that we're not to do? Because we want to be careful here. Is there anything wrong with righteous judgment? If we judge them as a Christian, if we make righteous judgment, we all judge others, don't we? I mean, that's just what we do. People are people. What's the difference between righteous judgment and unjust judgment? You see a big difference there? Anybody? So we don't judge. He's telling us this forbids harsh judgment on somebody's character or unjust criticism on someone that you have no foundation for. Does that make sense? But he doesn't forbid forming opinions of something that's right and wrong. This is to be done in love, and it's never severe. We shouldn't form hasty judgments, and sometimes that's what we do. We form a hasty judgment, but that's not right. Or an unkind judgment based on jealousy or something that suspicion or envy or hate. We're governed by that golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Also to judge another as we wish to be judged. That's how we want to be judged, isn't it? Yes, sir?
In John chapter 7, verse 24, it says, do not judge by appearance or outward judgment, but judge with righteous judgment.
Yeah.
A lot of times we look at somebody and we judge them by their appearance.
Yeah.
And we have them all wrong.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah, we're supposed to see their heart, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Thank you. That's right. So, as a Christian love with every judgment, if that makes sense. Using our love as a Christian that we have for others, golden rule, and that's based even on our judgment. If we don't seek to judge someone, and if we do, it is righteous judgment of what is wrong or right. Things that are wrong or right. Things that are true, not based on, like Darwin said, appearance or some other kind of jealousy or envy. That's not the right kind of judgment. We're all to make judgments, but he's not talking about that kind of judgment. And then he says in verse 38, give and it'll be given to you. They will pour into your lap. Now, what I like about this example, I love this. I'm going to read this again. I love this so much. It reminds me of something. In verse 38, given will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return. Do you remember a long time ago, some of you? You remember a long time ago? If we didn't have any flour, we just found out we don't have any flour and we need to go next door or something and get flour. Do you remember we'd go and we'd take a cup with us. This may have just been me, I don't know. And they'd take that cup and they'd scoop up some flour for you. What would they do with that flour? What would that lady do with that flour before I brought it back home? Press it down. Press it down. So it's the same principle. Good measure, shaken, pressed down. It also reminds me of an event in the Bible. You remember when Boaz gave Ruth, for her and her mother-in-law, gave her that some of that barley or wheat. Do you remember that? And he told her to, Ruth chapter 3, verse 15. Ruth chapter 3 and verse 15. She had on this outfit, a cloak or some kind, and so he told her to pull it out, and then he dumped a bunch of grain in. And this may not agree with me, but that reminds me of this. Ruth chapter 3 and verse 15 says, Boaz told Ruth, give me the cloak that is on you and hold it. So she's holding it, and so she held it, and he measured in 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. And then she went into the city. I mean, you give them good measure, don't you? People who ask for your help. You go the extra mile, shaken, pressed down. Anybody disagree with anything I've said so far? Does anybody understand what I said so far? I hope you do. Even in a grocery store, I remember a long time ago, there's no general store we'd go into, and he would give so much flour. It wasn't in a bag like we buy today, and he'd shake it, press it down. You know, that's how he did it. So we are to treat each other, all people, with good measure, pressed down, shaken, running over, verse 38, and verse 39 through 40. And he also spoke a parable to them. A blind man cannot guide a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? A pupil is not above his teacher. Not everyone, after he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher. So Jesus, in this parable, it's like a proverb. Can a blind guide a blind person? No, they can't, unless they have some kind of a device to help them today. But a blind person can't lead a blind man. And so they don't profit. Both will fall into the pit, he says. A blind person is not qualified to guide another blind person. So those who try to teach others when they don't know the truth themselves, what's that mean? Blind leading the blind. They're unfit. They are blind guides. And you know what the destruction is? I just gave it away. You know what the pit is for that kind of thing? Trying to teach someone when they don't even know God's Word ourselves, the pit is destruction. And so the Pharisees are described here, and he's picking on them, and they deserve it. The Pharisees are described here as blind guides. In Matthew 15 and verse 14, Jesus says, let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. If a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into the pit. That's in Matthew 15. Matthew 23, he says, woe to you blind guides. He's talking to the Pharisees who say, whoever swears by the temple that it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. They made up these silly rules in their traditions. It was oral traditions that have nothing to do with the whole law. So when blind teacher like Pharisees try to guide others or teach them, then they will both fall into the ditch. They'll both be destroyed. They are blind to spiritual truth, and they're guiding others who do not know the truth. And it's like a blind leading the blind, just like Shelby said. So a disciple, he says, is not above his teacher. So long as a person is a disciple, he's a learner, and they cannot be above the teacher. This is the nature of the relationship: a teacher, a student. A disciple naturally makes the teacher his model, doesn't he? You see that a lot in coaching. They become the model. I took Jim with me to the school because I didn't want to go by myself. He knows everybody. And so you could see the nature of his relationship with everyone. I mean, he hadn't been a teacher how long? 8 years. And how long has it been since you've been a teacher? 13, 14. And they act like it was just the other day to them when they were talking to him. It's amazing. I don't think that would happen to me if I went back to that big school where I was teaching. I really enjoyed that, watching that. So it's a nature of the student-teacher relationship. Discipline naturally makes his teacher as a model. He's being disciplined, and he's being disciplined by his teacher. It's the same thing, if that makes sense. So if the teacher's blind, then so is the disciple. If they are unfit, then the disciple is also unfit. Does any of that make sense to what I've said? If you disagree, you need to clarify or help me through this. Verse 41 and 42. I love this one. I know you do too. Why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, brother, let me take the speck out of that's in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. When he gives us an example like this, it's so easy to picture it in your mind. Here's a guy with a tiny little speck in his eye, and this man is trying to get it out, but he can't even get close because of the log that's sticking out of his eye. He makes this point, doesn't he? Because that's a person with this kind of spirit. He sees the smallest fault in everybody else, doesn't he? Except who? Except himself, because he's got this big log and he can't even see it. He cannot see the faults of his own character. He can always see the faults of others, but he can never see the faults of his own. Do you know anybody like that? You do? Brenda does? Okay. Yeah, that's a good saying. So Jesus gives us an example, a speck or a mote. I think King James says mote. King James says beam instead of a log. A speck is a mote, a log is a beam. So the speck or the mote is a fine particle, and a log and a beam is a timber sticking out of your eye. So he contrasts one person with sawdust speck in his eye, and the other, he's criticizing the one who's the critic has this log sticking out of his eye. So Jesus always gives an amazing example that we can all see. Any comments or anything else? After services, just ask Brenda who that is that she knows. Just kidding you. We've known. All of us, we look in the mirror, we know that we see. Yeah, we do. That's right. Thank you. Verse 43 and 44. For there is no good tree which produces bad fruit, nor, on the other hand, a bad tree which produces good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they pick grapes from a briar bush. So a good tree bears what kind of fruit? A good fruit. Bears good fruit. A bad tree that's dying at the root and the limbs, has no meristematic growth in the limbs. The character of the tree is determined by the fruit it bears. Everybody hear that? The character of the tree is known by the fruit it bears. This illustrates our heart and our life. A bad heart yields a wicked life. A good heart yields an honest and sincere heart with good purposes to do what's right. So Jesus teaches us that to estimate what the inner person is by what the outer person does. That's what he's saying here. We can figure out a person by what the outer person does. We can also figure ourselves by doing a self-evaluation, just like you said, looking in the mirror. A bad tree doesn't produce bad fruit because the roots are dried up or the limbs have no meristematic growth. I learned that a long, long time ago in biology. Meristematic stems on that tree when I was just a kid, and that's always stuck with me. I don't even know if that's true anymore. Is that still true? Is it still a word? I think it is. Science. That's an amazing example that we can understand. A person that living a wicked life, he has a bad heart. When he does this, what kind of tree does he produce? A bad tree with no fruit. And we are to be fruit-bearing Christians. I think if we ever understand that completely, it will change our attitude about a lot of things. Verse 45. The good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good. The evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. So Jesus is summing up what he's saying. He sums up character and the conduct of people. A good person, out of the good heart comes good words, good deeds, and good hearts are treasure. He's calling it treasure. But an evil person, that treasure is not good. An evil person comes evil words, evil deeds, evil thoughts, and his affections, the things that he focuses on, the things that he desires, are evil. Any comments? Verse 46. I must be doing real good. Verse 46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? You know, you can always ask that question in this world. I never have understood. Now, when I was 18 and 19, I understood because I rejected everything just about. Except, we'll talk about that this morning in the lesson. But why would somebody call somebody Lord and not obey him? Like he says. It's a puzzling thing to me. And you get so disappointed hearing some of the things you hear. It's inconsistent to call him Lord and not obey him in our life, or obey the gospel exactly like he says. You call him Lord, Lord, you admit that the Lord's right, then you are to do his commandments. If you do not do the things I command you, if you accept Jesus as Lord but refuse to obey him, these people do not make their confession And their practice agree, does it? Doesn't agree. Verse 47, 49. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when the flood occurred, the torrent burst against the house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who had heard has not acted accordingly is like the man who built his house on ground without any foundation. And the torrent burst against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the ruin of that house was great. That's the only time I like King James. You heard the American Standard. Rains came down, and what came up? Rains came down, and what came up? The rains came down, and the floods came up. And the foolish house man went what? Flat. Yeah. So you build your house on a good foundation, and that's in Jesus Christ. So the person that comes to Jesus Christ is a person who is doing and he's obeying by hearing and by faith. His hearing must be in faith, and his obedience must be necessary. James 1 and verse 22 says, but prove yourselves doers of the word, and not merely hearers only, who delude themselves. And James is perfectly right. The one who hears and does what Jesus says is like a man who is building his house. He dug deep. He placed it on a foundation of solid rock, and the rains and the floods and the house stood firm. But the one who doesn't do what Jesus says is like a man who builds his house on a foundation of sand. The floods came. What happened? The house swept away. And I'm going to finish Luke 16 because I can't wait to go to Luke chapter 7. I'm looking forward to that next Sunday. Study Luke chapter 7. So to wrap up Luke chapter 6, a hearer who does not obey the Lord has no foundation, no character, and no hope. Hearing is good, but failing to do is what? Condemned. We're swept away by a flood of evil. So the difference between how do I want to say it? The difference is great with the one who withstood the storm because he obeyed the Lord in his life. And the other went down in hopeless ruin simply because he did not obey. Jesus says, so it will be with those who hear and will not obey the Lord. Any final comments? Any final thing you want to add to that? We'll be in Luke chapter 7. I can't wait because Jesus is going to heal the centurion servant. Then you have some statements from John the Baptist, and then the parable of the two debtors, and a whole bunch more. And I am looking forward to it.